Greetings from my small cabin on the eastern shore of Virginia. My name is Mao Van Duren. I maintain this website to post documents, reports, and presentations on topics of interest that deserve a full discussion in the United States. Today, we enjoy the next installment of the presentations by Leonard Giannessi. He discusses Venezuela and the effects of the United States policy on that country. I'm sure you will enjoy the lectures as much as I do. Thank you.
In this talk, I'm going to argue that the United States' Attorney General, Garland, should dismiss the U.S. drug indictment of Venezuela's President Maduro. Under President Trump, the Attorney General Barr brought a drug indictment against the President of Venezuela, and basically what I'm arguing is that the current Attorney General should dismiss that. Now, the drug that I'm talking about, of course, is cocaine. Venezuela shares a long border with Colombia. Colombia is the country to the left of Venezuela, and Colombia is the world's largest producer of cocaine in the world. And Venezuela is also relatively close to the United States, which is the #1 consumer of cocaine in the world. So Venezuela's geography makes it susceptible to potentially having cocaine run from Colombia through Venezuela to the United States, and that's the issue here. A word about Nicolas Maduro. He is the president of Venezuela. He's the president who was indicted by the Attorney General Barr. And basically, Nicolas Maduro's had about a 20-year career as a politician and government official in Venezuela. A member of the National Assembly, Minister of Foreign Affairs. He served for a short time as vice president, and then he was elected, he's been president since 2013. He was elected in 2013, re-elected in 2018. The important point is he's had a 20-year career. Now, U.S. policy under Trump, with John Bolton as the National Security Advisor, was focused on the removal of Maduro as president of Venezuela. That was the focus. And here you see Bolton saying in his book, Trump said to me emphatically, get rid of the Maduro regime. And so the United States adopted a policy of maximum pressure, whatever he could do, whatever the government could do to get rid of Maduro, that was U.S. policy. So on March 26, 2020, Attorney General William Barr unsealed U.S. criminal indictments charging Maduro with narco-terrorism and drug trafficking. Narco-terrorism. And basically Barr said for his entire career, since 1999 when he came into public office, Maduro acted as a leader of the cartel of the Suns. And what they were trying to do was to flood the United States with cocaine and inflict the drug's harmful effects on users in the United States. So basically Barr is accusing Maduro of being a narco-terrorist, using narcotics as a way of terrorizing people in the United States, not for his own profit necessarily, but really as an evil person who is trying to essentially, as you see, flood the United States with cocaine. And Barr put up maps and with these red arrows indicating cocaine coming from Venezuela to the United States. And you can see these are direct quotes from Barr. Maduro very deliberately deployed cocaine as a weapon. Again, he's a narco-terrorist. That's what Barr was accusing him of. And in his role as leader of the cartel of the Suns, Maduro negotiated multi-ton shipments of cocaine. So Barr is pointing his finger directly at Maduro, saying Maduro negotiated these shipments. Maduro is trying to flood the United States with cocaine. He's a narco-terrorist. And to back up their claim, Barr and the Justice Department offered a reward of $15 million leading up to the arrest and or conviction of Maduro. This reward is still on the books. It has not been canceled. You help out in a capture or conviction of Maduro, there's a reward of up to $15 million. So again, United States telegraphing its very serious concerns with Maduro. Now, in indicting Maduro, Barr said, look, this is just an allegation. At the end of the day, we're alleging that he did these things. Now he would be, as a defendant, he would be presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Again, offering a $15 million reward and then on the other hand saying, well, you know, this is just an allegation. This is kind of like boilerplate language that's included to remind us all it's just an allegation. But that's not the way the press treated it. This is how the New York Times treated it. You know, Venezuelan leader charged with the U.S. with drug trafficking. And basically the New York Times coverage, Washington Post coverage, read like a press release from the Justice Department. You know, a decades-long narco-terrorism, international cocaine conspiracy, in which, again, prosecutors said he led a violent drug cartel called the Cartel of the Suns. And in this, a direct quote from the Times, the cartel prioritized using cocaine as a weapon against America. So their coverage is just regurgitating what the Justice Department accused Maduro of, exporting as much cocaine as possible to the United States to inflict damage on the United States. I mean, this is very serious charges, and they're essentially being presented in the Times just from one side. There was no dissenting opinion about the claims from Barr. What about evidence? What about evidence? There was no evidence presented that linked Maduro to drug transactions. You know, you could have, if he did this for 20 years, you'd think that there would be some photos of Maduro with drug traffickers. Maybe there'd be a wiretap conversation. Maybe there would be bank records. But there was nothing presented by the United States, any kind of hard evidence. The only evidence that the United States presented were accusations made by drug traffickers who were in U.S. custody. Now, this practice of using drug traffickers to give witness against government officials in Venezuela was kind of discredited by the Wall Street Journal in an article in 2015, basically saying that that's what these drug traffickers do in order to gain curry and favorable treatment in the United States. These drug traffickers know what the United States wants to hear. The United States wants to bring the pressure on Maduro. And so they basically tell Barr and the Justice Department what they want to hear. And so you see this quote from a Venezuelan general just say, we all know that whoever wants his green card and live in the United States, you just pick your leader and you accuse him of being a narco. And that's all the United States had in indicting Maduro, were these accusations from captured drug dealers. Now they could have looked around for people who had a different point of view. Pino Orlacci, who was the former executive director of the UN Office for Drug Control, he gave an interview on an Italian website where he says there's not the slightest evidence to support the slander that Venezuela has inundated the U.S. with cocaine. I mean, he's the former executive director of the UN Office for Drug Control saying there's not the slightest evidence. And the United States presented no evidence, but they did bring those charges. Now I'll introduce Fernando Casado to you because I'm going to quote him several times. He's the Dean of the Center for Law and Justice of the Institute for National Studies in Ecuador. And he's written widely on the issue of drug trafficking. So he had an essay in 2017. It was about the Cartel of the Suns. And he basically wrote in 2017, said it's an invention to attack Venezuela. It's made up. He basically says the Cartel of the Suns simply does not exist. And so it's something that the United States has made up in order to make these charges against Maduro. And after Barr indicted Maduro, Casado wrote another essay in July of 2020. He says the myth of the Cartel of the Suns, it doesn't exist. There is no such cartel. You have this Attorney General saying there's this Cartel of the Suns and Maduro's the leader, and Casado is saying, show me some evidence, show me some proof. It doesn't exist. And basically, he reiterates the charge that what the United States is trying to do is to demonize Maduro, turn Venezuela into a rogue state, just out of control, trying to flood the United States and corrupt the United States with cocaine. And then by saying that he's a narco-terrorist and out of control, that would justify action against Maduro that would otherwise be inconceivable. He's not just a president of a country, he's a narco-terrorist trying to corrupt the United States. And so also in his essay in July 2020, Casado took to task the media by saying that the media spread this indictment as if it were true. The media never questioned it. The New York Times, the Washington Post never had a dissenting opinion, never checked the veracity of the sources, never questioned the agenda of the United States, and not a single journalist from reputable newsrooms even questioned the existence of the Cartel of the Suns. And, Casado had written about it 3 years earlier, saying it's a myth, it's made up. Now, 2 weeks before Barr came out with his indictment of Maduro, there was a report on the street from the Washington Office on Latin America. They issued a report entitled Beyond the Narco State Narrative, what the U.S. drug monitoring data says about Venezuela. Now, Barr didn't cite this report, and you'll see why, but these researchers at WOLA seriously looked at the question of whether or not Venezuela was a major source for narcotics. And they drew on the best available data certified by the Department of Defense, the U.S. Interagency Consolidated Counter-Drug Database. They looked at the data and they said these are the best estimates, according to the Department of Defense, of where illicit drug flow is coming into the United States. So this report was issued 2 weeks before Barr indicted Maduro. And here's what they said in their report. This is the reason Barr didn't cite it. The WOLA report said Venezuela is not a primary country for U.S.-bound cocaine. It's not coming from Venezuela. 90% of all U.S.-bound cocaine comes from the Western Caribbean and the Eastern Pacific routes, not through Venezuela. And the data that they had from the U.S. agency shows that cocaine flows through Venezuela actually fell by 13% from 2017 to 2018, continued to go down. So 2 weeks before Barr issued his indictment, we have this research report that says Venezuela simply isn't a major source. The report from the researchers included this map that had been prepared by the U.S. Southern Military Command, and it was data for 2016, but it pretty much shows those blue lines are individual illicit shipments of cocaine out of Colombia. And they're not coming through Venezuela. They're coming on the western side. They're coming through the Pacific and the Western Caribbean. And this map was presented at a hearing in 2017 in the Senate caucus on international narcotics control. So the U.S. military command's data show that most of the drugs from Colombia are not going through Venezuela. Now, what about the coca crop itself? Well, the United Nations, ever since 2005, the United Nations has certified that coca is not grown in Venezuela. You would think that if they wanted to ship as much cocaine as they could to the United States, they would have their own crop. They don't. The crop is grown in Colombia. 70% of the cocaine consumed in the world is grown from the coca crop that comes from Colombia. Now, that's the problem that Venezuela faces. It's got a long border with Colombia. It's 1,300 miles long, it's heavily forested, it's rugged terrain, lightly patrolled. That's Venezuela's problem. They've got this border with Colombia, and you've got all this cocaine coming out of Colombia, and there are some traffickers who are going to develop routes going through Venezuela. Now, Venezuela's government has always taken the position that they are adamant in their fight against drugs. You see this report from the Congressional Research Service back in 2012. The Venezuelan officials maintain that contrary to these assertions from the United States government, the government has been taking significant steps. According to the government, stepped up patrols along the border with Colombia. It's acquired new radar to intercept planes. And they've got special incinerators to dispose of the seized drugs. That's what the government has been saying consistently during this 20 years. It's supposedly Maduro's been sending all this cocaine to the United States. And in fact, There is a national anti-drug office in Venezuela, and this is Richard Lopez, the incoming director in February of this year. We're neither a producer nor a consumer of illegal drugs. We maintain a permanent and constant fight against drugs. That's what the government in Venezuela has been saying consistently. Well, let's see what the data say. Well, the data that's been released from Venezuela show that from 2005 to 2019, Venezuelan authorities destroyed, disabled, or brought down 228 drug trafficking aircraft trying to fly through Venezuelan airspace to fly cocaine from Colombia. They list these planes that are brought down in the official gazette in Venezuela. You can look it up. One of the things they found in Venezuela is that drug traffickers were attaching packages of cocaine to the bottom of ships, to the hulls. And so beginning in 2017, the Venezuelan government said all of the hulls are going to have to be inspected by underwater divers to make sure that there isn't cocaine strapped to the bottom of these ships leaving Venezuelan ports. The 2018 UN report on global seizures of cocaine reported that in 2018, Venezuela seized 35 tons of cocaine, and that accounts for almost 3% of the world's seizure of cocaine. The cocaine is seized, it's disposed of, and again, the idea that Venezuela is trying to flood the United States with as much cocaine as possible is belied by reality. Now, the International Narcotics Control Board, the INCB, is an independent quasi-judicial monitoring body for the United Nations. And basically what the INCB does is send teams out to individual countries to monitor how they're dealing with international treaties about seizing drugs and fighting in this war against drugs. And so they monitor and support governments' compliance with international drug treaties. They're independent. I believe their offices are in Vienna. Here's what they said in 2015. So supposedly, Maduro's been shipping this cocaine to the United States as much as he could for 15 years. And here's what the annual report for the INCB in 2015. They had a visit to Venezuela. They say the cooperation of the government of Venezuela with the board has been satisfactory, as has its compliance with the international drug control treaties. The board has no problem with the government of Venezuela continuing to work to combat drug trafficking from bordering companies and to effectively finance the activities of the government agencies responsible for control and prevention of drug use. So this is supposedly 15 years into this massive shipment of cocaine from Venezuela by these government officials, including Maduro, and the INCB says we're having great cooperation and they're doing a great job. In 2017, the INCB did a little update on Venezuela, saying since its mission to Venezuela in 2014, the government has taken a number of actions to implement the recommendations of the board. Progress has been made in certain areas in the fight against drugs. So again, the INCB, which monitors governments' behavior in implementing international drug control treaties, hasn't had any problem with Venezuela. Another thing that you can look up is the number of international drug trafficking bosses that have been arrested in Venezuela. Between 2005 and 2017, more than 100 important drug trafficking bosses were captured in Venezuela. They're trying to smuggle cocaine through Venezuela, and they've been arrested. And 21 of them were extradited to the U.S. So again, the charge that Maduro is trying to flood the United States with cocaine, you look at what's actually been going on, they have been arresting drug traffickers who are trying to get cocaine into the United States. And then they send the drug traffickers to the United States to stand trial. Now, one capture in 2012 merits some discussion. There was a drug trafficker named El Loco, and El Loco, a Colombian, was charged with producing up to 400 tons of cocaine per year, and he was arrested in Venezuela. Now, the New York Times said, look at this joint effort by the United States, a joint effort by the United States and Venezuela leading to this drug lord's arrest. And the El Loco was arrested because there were 4 nations that were cooperating. We had in Washington, D.C., you had Colombian police, intelligence officials, you also had the CIA, the DEA, you had British intelligence agency, all monitoring where El Loco was and what phones he was using. Okay, they were camping out in the United States with Americans, and then they passed information along to Venezuelan National Guard officials in Venezuela saying El Loco is using this payphone in this community right now. Go and arrest him. And the Venezuelan National Guard did that. So you had this tremendous cooperation taking this major trafficker out of circulation. He was responsible for 400 tons a year. And Venezuela cooperated with the United States, with Colombia, with Britain on taking him out of the picture. Venezuela and the United States also have a joint bilateral maritime agreement. It was signed in 1991, and basically it's to cooperate on taking over vessels in international waters. And so there's an agreement that says if the United States wants to board a Venezuelan flagged vessel in international water, they can ask the government of Venezuela for if that's okay. You know, if the Venezuelan government would go along with that, cooperate in that takeover. And here's some data from the State Department from 2012 through 2016. There's about 30 vessels. There were about 30 vessels that were in international waters, flagged as Venezuelan ships that the United States wanted to board and seize because they thought that there was drugs on there, and the Venezuelan government cooperated. Again, this is hardly something a country is going to do if they want to get as much cocaine as they can in the United States. Here they are cooperating with the United States to keep cocaine out. The outgoing head of the Office of Drug Prevention in Venezuela did a little update in October and basically reported what was happening in 2020 in the first 6 months. Disabled 34 aircraft, destroyed 15 runways. 48% of the people detained for drug trafficking have been deported to the United States. So this was last year. They're still arresting drug traffickers in Venezuela that try to use the airspace there and deporting them to the United States. I mean, that's cooperation. That's cooperation. That's not the government trying to flood the United States. It's cooperating in keeping drugs out. Now, the indictment of Maduro is not about drugs. Jeff Ramsey, who was one of the authors of that Wool report, had an op-ed in the Washington Post and said, it's not about drugs. This indictment of Maduro is a political reason. Basically, again, this idea that Maduro is a rogue leader, he's a narco-terrorist. The Trump administration didn't want to have any negotiation with him. How can you negotiate with a narco-terrorist? He's not a legitimate president, he's a narco-terrorist. And so by branding him that, it was political. That justified the United States in not working with Maduro to resolve any issues we have between the two countries. Again, it's embracing this idea of hardline opponents in Venezuela, just saber rattle enough and bring these kinds of charges and Maduro will fall. The Wola report made basically the same point about Maduro and about this narrative being a political one. It's invoked, this narco-state narrative is invoked by hardliners as not just authoritarian. He's not a legitimate president. He's not just authoritarian, but he's motivated as a narco-terrorist. Therefore, the United States can't negotiate with him, and we're going to have to use brute force to deal with him. Fernando Quesada made the same point in his 2020 essay. He says, look, sooner or later, we're going to read about this in books. We're going to read it. We're going to see this in documentaries, how the United States made up these charges. And, you know, maybe that's in 10 years or whatever when the full story is told. But right now, it's serious warmongering by the United States. And so he makes the obvious point that Iraq was accused of having weapons of mass destruction, which they didn't have, but that allowed the United States to go in. And so now Venezuela is being accused of being a narco state, which would allow the United States to go in with force because they're trying to flood the United States with cocaine. And that's basically some of the sabers that President Trump waved. Right after Barr indicted Maduro, Trump organized and announced that U.S. Navy ships are being moved toward Venezuela. His administration is beefing up this counter-narcotics operation in the Caribbean. So again, the same idea. You know, there are narco traffickers coming out of Venezuela. We better get down there with our ships. We might have to start firing at people who are trying to flood the United States with cocaine coming out of Venezuela. And he sent these ships down. Trump basically doubled the U.S. counter-narcotics capacity in the Western Hemisphere, sending warships down, sending planes down. It's a saber-rattling. It's warmongering. I mean, those ships aren't coming from Venezuela. They're coming from Colombia. But by sending their ships down, again, it could be in support of a coup. You know, it shows people in Venezuela that the U.S. military is there, and they'll be justified in intervening militarily because of what Maduro is doing. So we know that Barr was out as Attorney General in late December, just after the election of Joe Biden. Barr resigned or was fired. Basically, he was out in the middle of December. And the quotes about Barr in the New York Times were devastating. Barr had worked from the start to advance Mr. Trump's political agenda. So Mr. Barr made decisions that dovetail with what Trump wanted and the demands of his political allies. Trump and his political allies want Maduro out. And so Barr supported that with maximum pressure by bringing those drug charges against Maduro. Now, we know that right now, people in Congress, like Gerald Nadler, who is the chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, says, look, whoever Biden appoints as Attorney General has got a lot of work to do. The new Attorney General has got to go through all of those decisions that Barr made and sort out the ones that were made for purely political reasons. And this is one of those. And Nadler and others have continued this drumbeat that the Biden Justice Department needs to go in and clean out the ones that were just for political reasons. So Merrick Garland is our new Attorney General, and he can cancel that reward for Maduro's capture immediately. He can also dismiss the drug charges. All he's got to do is look at the record, and if he makes a decision that this was done for political reason and that there's no evidence, as many people have said, there's no evidence to support the drug charges against Maduro, he can cancel them, dismiss them. And I think he should. I think that Garland should dismiss the drug charges against Maduro. The charges were for political reasons, not based in fact. There is no evidence against Maduro. Nothing has been cited, no hard evidence at all. The cartel of the Suns that the United States cites as being the huge conspiracy that Maduro has been running for 20 years, it simply doesn't even exist. And finally, Venezuela has a good record in the war on drugs. Venezuela has taken and has been certified by the UN as having a good record in implementing international agreements, even cooperating with the United States in keeping shipments from going from Colombia through Venezuela to the United States.